Okay, we're on part 3 of my personal UK hip hop timeline, how I learned about a lot of UK hip hop. We're in the early 90s, and this is part 3. And I talked about on, I believe, the first video, maybe the second as well, that one key way was the partnership between Musical Life in the UK and Profile in the US. And then in the early 90s, Profile went direct and signed a group called Caveman. And I remember they did I think they did 2 records on Profile. And I remember seeing from the first album, they had at least 1 or 2 videos that were getting some play on the box or some video show around 91 era. And I remember seeing those. And then so I was kind of getting familiar with Caveman through that. But then another way that was helpful to learn about a lot of hip hop was this was also the time by the late 80s, you started seeing some more hip hop magazines out there. And actually one of the very first kind of like authentic hip hop magazines is out of the UK, and that is Hip Hop Connection. My first issue that I own is this one here, number 25 from February 91, that has Caveman on the front cover. So I'm pretty sure I got this after, maybe around the same time. I'm not sure if I saw the video first or this first. But Hip Hop Connection was a magazine I couldn't find very easily in the Chicago area, but I ended up getting a decent amount. This is my whole collection, Hip Hop Collection, Hip Hop Connection. And it's mostly the later ones because there was only one store I knew that had it, Tower on Clark Avenue, not too far from Gramophone, but they had an import price. It was like $10, $12. I was like, I can't really justify paying that for a magazine. So I would go there, read it, take notes, and learn about a lot of artists from the UK from Hip Hop Connection. Kind of that in mind, another magazine, maybe a little bit later, out of the Bay, shout out Dave Paul, he had The Bomb. And I got you, this is probably about half my Bomb collection here. You can't really see them, I guess, but they always had the dope covers, black and white, but they made it really count. And all these issues here have our writer, Faisel Ahmed, out of the UK. He eventually started doing some, I think he started doing more reviews, but then got into interviews. He's got an interview with Melly Mel in here, I know for sure. I just passed it right there, matter of fact. And then he got a column in here, straight from the UK, that gave a UK report. Honestly, he kind of gave a lot talked about not just UK music, but just what was happening in UK, what popular US records were getting played out there or coming out, or things he heard about. But he was also giving some information about the UK, including in one of these, he reviews a Hijack single for 94-95 that actually, I think it's the February 94 issue. I don't think that ever came out. Coming to Get You, Hijack, and talk about kind of a comeback project they were working on. And so that's how I connected with him. After reading about that, I think I hit up David Paul, then I found out how to reach Faisel, called him, and we talked a few times back then, and and then he gave me some information, some insight about Hijack in the UK scene, because I was just hungry, so I was just grabbing information for wherever I could. And The Bomb kind of continued it, because they, beyond the magazine, they were known for their mail order with the magazine, and they started putting out music as a label on Bomb Records. They had the Bomb Worldwide compilation in '97. They had artists from all over the world. And, then they had the Return to DJ compilation. They had DJs from all over the world. They had a special Japan issue of the magazine that focused on hip hop in Japan, obviously, and so stuff like that. So they were really cutting edge in making sure UK was looked at, and it's not even the UK, but it's like hip hop was looked at universally. So shout out The Bomb and David Paul. And then another place I was learning about things was actually in Chicago area, WNUR 89.3 Evanston, Chicago. I mentioned this a few times. They had a radio show. It was a dance show that I believe was right before the hip hop show. And they had a dance show that mostly was like house music and dance music, electronic, but they would play some UK hip hop, mostly Britcore. Not all Britcore, because they played some London Posse, but that's how I first heard King B, Cold Slam, and the feature Ultramagnetic MCs. Silver Bullet was the one I heard the most probably on that show. Bring Forth the Guillotine and 20 Seconds to Comply were big on those shows. But I never saw these records. The only way I could hear them was listening to this radio show in WNUR that was mostly dance music, and occasionally they might throw in a UK rap artist. So stuff like that. They also play some Ruthless Rap Assassins, another one they would play. So that was one show. So shout out. I'm not even sure who was doing that show. Whoever's doing that, shout out for kind of stretching beyond what that was. Speaking of stretching, that was not intentional. Maybe it was in my brain. Stretching Bobbito were like, playing a lot of underground hip hop and not really a lot of international stuff. But there was a point in time where this guy, Tony Bones, was kind of known for going down to the show. He had affiliation with Organized Confusion, and he had a couple of demos like Come Upstairs and Freestyles. Then he partnered with a guy in Brooklyn called Mr. Live, and they had a group 88 What's His Names and a dope single called Hunger Strike in 95, 96, working with Earl Blaze of Anti-Pop Consortium. So you were seeing by this time, my point is the mid-90s, a lot more collaborations and possibilities for collaborations for US and UK artists and just anyone. Just internationally, hip-hop was getting a little more international. This is also right around the time the internet was really just starting to come about. Even more so important yet than the internet, I would say email. And that's getting to something in a second here. One other thing, though, first we get to the email situation and record stores. Shout out DJ Pratt. Me and Pratt connected around this time in like the late 90s. And he was really into like DJ battles. I kind of lost connection with DJ battles. So like this is like around the time like the ITF and there was like the Vestex and things like that. He was watching those, and this like I one day was over his house. I was over there like almost every day, but one day in particular, he was watching some VHS tape he had because he was buying these VHS tapes, and I started seeing more DJs. Now to be fair, they weren't all. I mean, there was some like Prime Cuts and stuff like that from the UK, but also Denmark with Noise and Static. So it was more like Europe and just also DJs from around the world. But it was like I'm saying, so the UK was one of the first scenes like internationally outside the US to get light. But around the mid-90s, you started seeing more. And DJing and DJ battles was one way that really started to spread. DJ battles are pretty, DJing in general continually is an important factor of how hip-hop spreads in a global sense, dating back from the origin of hip-hop to Rocky with DST and so on. So kind of one of the last things I want to talk about, I think, in this section is Gramophone Records, which I mentioned earlier on Clark Avenue in Chicago. I used to go there. That was one of my main stores I would go to get new vinyl and 12 inches. At some point, they were a sponsor for my radio show on NUR because I eventually ended up having a show on that same station, WNUR, in the mid-90s. And so I would go there and I would get sponsored to get a certain amount of records every week to play on my show. And there was just a 1 week where I had like pretty much exhausted everything that I wanted from the hip hop wall. They had this hip hop wall run by the Mole Men. Shout out to Mole Men. And they would order, they had a great hip hop section there. But this 1 week, I just wasn't finding anything that grabbed my attention for whatever reason. And so I just started randomly looking around and I found the import section. I didn't realize that they put anything that was rap that wasn't US based, they put in the import section. So that's where I learned about a whole new world. Jazz Fudge Records was a big one. So I already knew about Blade and Mark B from, I learned about Mark B and Task Force from there. That was one of the first things I found there. The Isolationists I found there. Jehst, that 12-inch he did that had him and Jay Zone on it, I found in that section. I learned about Roots Manuva, Lewis Parker, Skinnyman, and all that, basically from going into this import section and then seeing what labels were there and then exploring more of those labels and artists. That led me to like the ones I already said, Klasnekoff, MC Mello, who I'd heard about for a long time but never knew how to find his records, The Planets, Black Radical MK2, Big Quam, Phi-Life Cypher, New Flesh for Old. All these groups were just kind of like that Gramophone's import section opened all that up. And then that also led to around the same time, the late 90s going into the early 2000s, a lot of like producer related records from the UK in general area. So stuff like the Herbaliser, Attica Blues, DJ Vadim, who's from Russia but was based in the UK for a lot of this, the Nextmen and the Monks of Madness Project, Unsung Heroes, the Creators, Skitz, who had the Countryman record with a dope record with this three women, Estelle, Temple, and Wildflowers, my favorite song on that record. So I was hearing about all that stuff, and that sort of really solidified the fact that I love UK production. Like all those producers had dope beats. So I was like, oh, I want to work with a producer in the UK eventually. So all that was what's taking place and me to become a bigger and bigger fan learning about more stuff. And some of those artists I mentioned earlier are like literally some of my favorite artists of that time, particularly Jehst, Task Force, Mark B and Blade's solo stuff. I later eventually went back and got some of Blade's earlier stuff that I heard about. He was like a person I would hear about. He was like being cutting edge and being anti-industry, selling records on mail order. He had people buying his records while he made them. Like he bought the records in advance, and then when he finished it, you would get it. He was just doing things that were cutting edge, and that was, he wasn't the only one, but he one of the first key ones out of the UK. And then in Hijack being really the first that I heard doing that stuff. So they were really cutting edge, and a lot of my favorite artists. So like I said, yeah, like Jehst, Task Force, Blade, Klasnekoff, Roots Manuva, dope MCM producer. So this era has a lot of things that I became a fan of. And then it gets kind of to the next era, and kind of that end, and one of the producers that right around the early 2000s, I started hearing about this guy, the P Brothers. And that leads to how I found out about Cappo, who's actually featured on this record with me and Awkward on a song called Forward Path. And we'll get to that eventually too. Yeah, so we got, the history. This keeps going. The UK has so much to offer. You should be up on it. Yeah.